I think we're live.
Looks like
Uh,
it.
this is great. Neither of us have done a Substack live before, so this should be a
Nope,
lot of fun.
not at all.
Um, I think there's a lot of grace. Both our audiences tend to be heavy on grace and compassion,
Hope
so
so. Yeah,
you know, it should
we'll
be.
need it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also a bit fun because I don't really think either of us told our subscribers we were going to do this. We decided we were going to do it because our schedules are crazy. And then
Yeah,
we were just like, let's just let's hop on tonight and make it work. So,
yeah,
yeah, welcome to those of you joining us. This is going to be a great conversation, joint conversation between Kevin and myself. Both of us are online friends. We've been online friends for a number of years. We've got to meet in person once
yeah.
in Minneapolis,
At
which is
Evolving
quite
Faith.
cool.
Yeah,
Evolving Faith, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and now I mean, Kevin, you already had a book back then,
I
but
did.
I have my first book coming out at the end of this
Woo.
month, and you have a book coming out too. Your second book?
Yeah, February.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. And I mean, for my audience who are not familiar with you, please do introduce yourself too, and I'll do the same for yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my name's Kevin Nye. I am in Minneapolis. Now I am kind of specifically focused on the intersection of homelessness and housing and faith. My upbringing was in faith. I went to seminary thinking I was going to be a pastor. Long story short, pivoted to working in homelessness in Los Angeles, then moved to Minneapolis 3 years ago. So I've been doing this work for about 10 years, but specifically doing this writing and advocating at the faith intersection for about 5 years now. And I think that's how you got to know me, Joash. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I got to know you for your similar, overlapping, and yet different work.
Yeah. It helps a lot. I mean, you make friends real fast when you draw the same type of haters and foes,
Yes.
especially in
The
the good,
the
right?
enemy of my enemy. Right. Yeah.
And so this is great. Yeah, I'm so glad our paths crossed and that we're connected. And Kevin, I bring up uh, uh, you know, and you don't have to return the compliment here at all, but I bring up your work quite frequently in conversations with people. And I say, you really need to read his book because, and your first book too, I think you capture really well what I'm trying to say on the decolonization front, right? So,
Mhm.
um, just this week, I was on a few podcasts talking about one of my chapters in the book, The Justice of Jesus. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it,
There it
that's
is.
my book. Comes out at the end of September. And in this book, I've got a chapter called Decolonizing Our Budgets.
Mm.
And, one of the examples that I provide on how our budgets and Christian ministries are colonized today is this expectation that um, people in poverty and oppression, we only give them good things if they attend a Bible study.
Hmm.
We only sponsor a child if that child is also educated about Jesus, right? And these are colonized expectations because nowhere in the Gospels do we see Jesus placing such demands on his marginalized neighbors, right? And you, Kevin, this is where I see this perhaps the strongest overlap in our work. You're quite bold in taking on what I think is a really broken model of serving our unhoused neighbors
Yeah.
in the midst of a housing crisis that operates in very colonized ways without even us realizing it. I mean, these are well intentioned folks doing things in very colonized mindset. So before we go into colonization, decolonization, I know those are
Yeah.
heavy terms, but tell us from your lived practical experience what that looks like and what you take on in so much of your work in the housing ministry area.
Yeah. Well, I think you nailed it. And I've gotten to read a couple portions of your book that were sent to me by your publisher, and one that just jumped right out as just the perfect synthesis between our work is when you talk about the different tenets that emerge in, a colonized theology, and the first one being that Jesus came primarily to save souls. Because, I talked about this in my first book, but then my second book is really, really about this, which is what you just described, that there's a particular type of doing homelessness ministry that a certain um, group ascribes to, that is, we are doing this primarily as an evangelistic effort.
Mm,
That the end result is not to end someone's homelessness or to end their hunger or to um, transform their future apart from uh, them accepting Christ as their personal savior. And
mm,
um, the group that I sort of go after the most in the book is the Gospel Rescue Mission, which the book goes a lot into the origins of that and how that differs from now, but sort of where those seeds were planted very early, to sort of say that the, the gospel proclamation is the most important thing we do, and everything else is secondary. To the extent that um, some even back in the early 20th century described, giving out food as the bait on the hook, right?
wow.
Um, the hook being the gospel presentation, right, and the food being the
Mm,
bait to get somebody forced to sit down and experience that. Um, and that it has so many implications, and that's why I'm really excited for this conversation, right? Because it absolutely has implications for how we talk about homelessness and how we talk about what works for addressing homelessness, but also it goes so far beyond that. It goes to how we over spiritualize our faith, so that we actually don't care what happens to people's bodies, or that we don't actually pay attention to land and what God has to say about land and who should own it and what we should do with it, how we take care of the earth, right? That the the Jesus coming primarily to save souls may be the like root issue of just about everything that's wrong with Western Christian theology. I would go so far
mm,
as to say. And so
mm.
it impacts my work in homelessness, but it goes so far beyond that.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I see this too, Kevin. As you know, I've worked in the anti-human trafficking space for the past
Mhm.
decade. Um, And what I have seen is well meaning evangelical Christians, even church leaders, say things like, what's the point of rescuing these children if their souls go to hell? What's the point of
Yeah.
rescuing them from human trafficking if their souls go to hell? Aren't they dead in the water anyway? Right. And I remember the first time I heard that, I had to go take a shower because I know survivors, right? I've
Yeah.
met them. I've met these children after they've been rescued. And, um, it's mind-boggling that many of us in the church would have that kind of a mindset, but the reality is who has taught us about Jesus, right? In the Western church. And in the Western church, that's slaveholders and colonizers who taught us about Jesus. So we have learned to view Jesus through the eyes of people with power who abuse their power instead of the powerless, instead of the enslaved and the colonized and those in the margins, right? And I think for people like you and I, Kevin, the gospel has just hit different when we've interacted with people on the margins and just experienced Jesus in them, even if they don't know Jesus, even if they don't talk about Jesus, they still embody Jesus in many
Hmm.
ways. And Jesus' own words, because Jesus told us, what you do unto the least of these, you do unto me, right? When you visit your brother, sister, sibling in prison, you visit me. When you care for the physical needs of your neighbors, you care for me. These are teachings that we've gotten directly from Jesus, but teachings that we've abandoned as we've pursued this, what I think is a false gospel of Jesus cares way more about the salvation of your souls than the freedom of your human bodies. And this is what I call one of the tenets of the colonizer's gospel is that, yeah, it's this flawed understanding of the gospel that Jesus cares more about the freedom of our souls than the freedom and well-being of our human bodies, when that is not what we see with Jesus of Nazareth, right? Like,
Yeah,
you know, Luke chapter 4, verse 18, Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, the oppressed, the captive." And then what does he do for the rest of the book of Luke? He goes and he does these things, right? He's setting people free from their physical captivity, from hunger, from demonic oppression, from their paralysis, from sickness. Like, he's healing sick people. He's showing that the gospel is both physical and spiritual, but yet, um, and this is my thesis in the book, it's that colonizers and slaveholders benefited off of telling the colonized and enslaved, hey, Jesus cares more about the salvation of your souls and your ultimate destination than your hell right now. So don't worry about your suffering right now. Just focus on the afterlife. Don't think about your chains in the
exactly.
present. And I'm curious, do you see that in the ministry that you do with our unhoused neighbors too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a very convenient theology for people who are already in power and would like things to stay the exact way that they are, right? Um, it's a very convenient theology for people who um, don't experience homelessness, who don't experience housing insecurity, um, to do things exactly the way that they want, right? To ultimately hold a belief that they are morally, spiritually better than people who are experiencing poverty and homelessness, right? I think
Mm,
that's a central myth that I find myself always having to tackle, right? That um, poverty somehow is the result of bad choices, um, not being Christian enough, not doing enough, not trying hard enough, um, and so therefore the fact I mean, it's prosperity gospel, right? But it's the part of the prosperity gospel that we don't even talk about as much, right? Because prosperity gospel says, you know, if you follow Jesus, if you make the right choices, God will bless you with wealth. The unspoken part of that, right, is that if you are poor, if you are experiencing homelessness, then you must not be doing that, right?
mm.
Um, because I say this a lot, that to me one of the most offensive things about this notion that we need to preach the gospel to unhoused people is that it assumes that unhoused people aren't already people of faith, um, and that has never been my experience. Um, Everywhere that I've worked in this field, people talk about God all the time.
Wow.
Like, as much as I went to seminary, and sometimes I feel like I hear people talking about God and spirituality more at work than I did in
Wow.
seminary. Um, because people who uh, there's this idea that I've been kind of meditating on for years now, that it's kind of hard to articulate because it
Mm,
sort of sounds like you're um, glamorizing homelessness a little bit.
mm.
Um, but the idea that has just emerged over and over again is that people who do experience marginalization, whether it's homelessness, whether it's racism, whether it's homophobia, right, um, actually in some ways have an experience of the world that is truer,
Yeah.
because so much of what we take for granted is stripped away. So
Mm,
much of what isolates us from from one another is stripped away. Especially when people experience homelessness, they are forced to rely on the goodness of others, the community within one another. I mean, this is what encampments are, right? This is communities built on the fringes of empire, right?
oh,
Where people
smokes.
have to take care of one another and who realize, oh, I can't make it on my own. Those of us who don't experience that have this false belief that we're rugged individuals, we can make it on our own, we're not inherently linked to our neighbor and their well-being, right? I
Mm,
think people who experience marginalization um, don't have that myth because they can't afford to, right?
Wow.
And so I think in some ways, people who experience marginalization like homelessness really have something to teach us about what's true about life, about God, about
Mm,
community. Um, that I always want to make sure that I'm a student of, right?
mm,
Um, because it is very easy when I go back home to just fall back into like, oh, like I earned what I got. I made it here on my own, right? Like we just have to take care of my own nuclear family. Everyone else has to figure it out for themselves, right? That's what's in the air around us in America in the West constantly. Um, and those who experience homelessness, again, they've they themselves are proof that that's not true.
wow.
And they live that on a daily basis.
Wow. Man, that is so good. Even as you were talking about the community within these encampments, I was thinking about the early church.
Hmm.
And I can't help but wonder, and I'm sure you've already explored this, but I can't help but wonder if these encampments are more like the early church, where they had everything together in common, than the average local church in
Yeah,
North America, right? And
yeah,
I just can't help but wonder. And you and I know that in many cases, Jesus is not in many cases, in every case, Jesus is absolutely present in these encampments. But we as the local church haven't cultivated the eyes to see Jesus on the margins, including in these encampments, right? Instead of seeing Jesus there, all we see are inconveniences to our own comforts and our own empires, right? And so we see problems that need to be gotten rid of versus um, neighbors who can actually teach us about Jesus
yep,
if we humble ourselves and sit at their feet. So, well, I've actually never thought of that before. I'm also an external processor verbally. So,
mhm,
as you were kind of putting those pieces together, I just I just couldn't help but think about that. Man, this is great. So, real quick, I don't know if people. So, this is Kevin and I's first time doing Substack Live. So, I actually don't
yeah.
know if people can drop comments in here. Like, I see
I
a
don't
right
know.
message, but I don't know if people can drop comments. So, if you can drop comments, go ahead, drop comments. And if you have questions for us too, like we'd love to, take on questions too at the same time. So feel free to use that if you do have a comment feature. Again, apologies if you don't. Neither of us know how this actually works. So appreciate your
Or if we'll
grace.
see them if you do. Hopefully we
Right,
will.
exactly. Right. There's also that. Yeah, maybe there's some button we need to be. Oh,
Oh,
okay. Ben says perhaps we can. I guess we're in business.
we
All
can.
right.
Go
Thank you,
Ben.
Ben. Yeah, yeah. Shanika says good evening,
Oh,
Kevin.
that's my boss. Hello.
Oh, hey, hey, Shanika. Amazing, amazing. No, these are great. Yeah, what questions do you have for Kevin, myself, as we talk about justice, decolonization, as we talk about our books, um, and yeah, curious what questions you have. But while people are coming up with questions, Kevin, I'm also thinking about um, just the book that you've already written, and the book that you're writing right now. Tell us a little bit about both of those projects. Tell us about the first book you wrote, where people can find it, and about this one you're writing now that I think pre-orders are live for.
Pre-orders are live for. Thanks
Okay,
for
yeah,
that.
tell us about both, please.
Okay, I will, but I also want to make sure that you do a lot of talking about your book because your book is
uh,
about to come out and I am so stoked for it. Um, Someone says, this seems right up my alley. I used to work at a homeless shelter and I'm in seminary now. Perfect.
Thanks,
Amazing.
Ben.
Yeah. So yeah, the way that I've sort of talked about and differentiated these two books is that book one is sort of the head and the heart, right?
Hmm.
It's about how,
And what's it called?
yeah, it's called Grace Can Lead Us Home, a
Hmm.
Christian Call to End Homelessness. And that book was really aimed at helping us rightly as Christians understand what homelessness is,
Hmm.
really cutting through all of the myths that are out there, and to really connect our Christian faith, not just to caring about homelessness, but understanding it in the right way and understanding what its causes and solutions are. Um, and kind of when I finished writing the book and people read the book, there was a lot of um, questions around like, okay, like what do I do now? Like, my mind's been changed, my heart's been opened. Now what? And so book two, if book one is the head and the heart, then book two is the hands and the feet, right?
Hmm.
Um, and the way that it went through a bunch of different iterations in my head, but where it ultimately landed is it's this book about getting it right, and that's this part of the subtitle. The title is "Hope for the Mission: Getting It Right in the Call to End Homelessness." Because I think that it would have been very easy for me to write a book about Christians that are getting it wrong, right? And I think there does need to be some truth telling about that, just
Yeah.
like we already have talked about a little bit
Yeah.
tonight. But I didn't want to write a whole book about what's going wrong because what
Mm.
I actually got to learn after my first book came out, because folks across the country reached out to me, told me, "Hey, we read your book. We're doing this thing over here, and this church over here is like, we're doing this." And I found out this nonprofit that I already knew about actually was birthed out of a church
Mm.
originally. And so I was getting all these stories and going like, wow, there's so much like great work and real momentum
Yeah.
already existing. I want to tell those stories,
Mm.
and use those stories as a way into not just here's something that's working, but here's why it's working. Here's what it the best practice that it aligns with. And
Wow.
so book two, really the first couple chapters do start with, this gospel rescue mission
Mm.
model and what's going on there.
Mm.
And then after that, it's storytelling of churches and faith-based organizations that are doing really, really cool work, right? And they're grouped in chapters around churches that are doing similar work, whether there's churches that are building affordable housing on their property, or
Mm.
churches that are really focused on like political advocacy, churches that are focused on um, opening up their own space or hosting like a day center for people to come in.
Wow.
Um, and
Wow.
really, it gave so many different opportunities to, again, not just talk about cool stories, but really um, explore the wide range of homelessness and housing and all the different types of work that can be done in it. And the hope in this book is that
Incredible.
churches would read it and not go, "Oh, I have to do all of these things," right?
Mm.
But see how many different ways there are. Because all the time churches are like, "Okay, so what should we do?" And I don't want to answer that for them, right? Because it's different for every church. Like, what are
Yeah.
your resources? What are your passions? Who's already in your community that can be activated? Because there might be one church that has a dilapidated building on their property that they could afford to refurbish as affordable housing. There might
Yeah.
be another church that doesn't even own their own property, right? That
Mm.
they meet in someone else's property. So that chapter, they might be inspired by something, but they're not going to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to give folks a lot of different options and a lot of different avenues for what they could do.
That's great. That's great. Yes, to answer Ben's question in here, um, so I live in Canada, um, and Kevin is in the States. So both of us have these perspectives, but I'm sure Kevin has worked with people up in Canada. I know a lot of his audience is Canadian. A lot of my audience is
Yeah.
American. I'm a U.S. citizen, and so yeah. So we've got a good mix of perspectives here. And with my book, what I'm trying to do is essentially bring global South, global church Christian theology. Um, to the Western church, especially the Western evangelical church, even things like liberation theology, theology from the margins, and whether that's Black liberation theology or even Latin American liberation theology, Palestinian liberation theology, and even my own family's heritage, right? So I'm a St. Thomas Indian Christian. My family's been Christian 2,000 years, going back to the Apostle Thomas, who brought the gospel to my ancestors. And, we were Christian for 1,500 years before the Portuguese colonizers showed up in the name of Jesus and tried to convert us to their ways of worshiping Jesus. So what I do is I try to go back in history and retrieve ancient, pre-colonial, indigenous Christian beliefs of my ancestors to help us focus on justice more in the Western Church, because I think there are truly beautiful values in the historical church that have been lost because of colonization. And what I say in the book is that colonization wasn't just bad for the global south, it was also bad for the Western church because it
Yeah.
shaped us in our participation to resist justice for marginalized neighbors like our unhoused neighbors, even here. I think it goes back to just this idea that injustice isn't just bad for the humanity of the oppressed, it's also bad for the humanity of the oppressor and for those on their side because it shapes us to be people who God did not create us to be. And this is also something I try to draw attention to in the book. And I love that you talk about both the diagnosis as well as the prognosis, Kevin,
Yeah.
because that's exactly what I try to do in this book, The Justice of Jesus. The first three chapters is a diagnosis of how we got here with uncomfortable truths about colonization. But then the next six chapters are actually hopeful prognosis. Like, where do we go from here? And again, like you, Kevin, I'm not saying one size fits all or here are some cookie cutter solutions. I'm saying here are some things that churches have done all over the world that I think are really good things to replicate. So hopefully this sparks some ideas for you in your context, because ultimately, you as a church leader, you as a Christian need to decide. Um, what this means for your context. You need to discern that with the Holy Spirit for the justice issues that are unique to your context. And hopefully, this just sparks some ideas for a positive reimagination of the Christian faith in our context, so that the good news of Jesus actually sounds like good news to our poor and oppressed neighbors. Because if it's not good news to our poor and oppressed neighbors, if it's not good news to our unhoused neighbors, our neighbors in Gaza, victims of genocide or human trafficking around the world, then it's not the good news of Jesus Christ. Plain and simple as that, right? Kevin, something else I want to ask you about is something I talk about in my book, which is um, the empires of this earth, whether it's the American Empire, the Southern Confederacy Empire, the Nazi Third Reich Empire, all the empires throughout human history, the empires of this earth try to divide and conquer,
Yes.
right? But the gospel of Christ unites to heal. What I'm curious about is, we see empires pitting marginalized people groups against each other all the time.
Yeah.
And, a few months ago, I was with our mutual friend, Shane Claiborne in Canada. And, we were just having Canadian chai at Tim Hortons. And two people walk in,
Mm.
an Indian immigrant
Yeah.
and a white Canadian unhoused neighbor. And they're both yelling abusive things at each other. They're both cursing each other out and screaming and yelling, right? And I looked at Shane and I said, "This is exactly what we're seeing in Canada right now, where marginalized people groups are being pitted against each other, where unhoused people are told that immigrants are responsible for the housing crisis, and immigrants are told that unhoused people are lazy and not hardworking." I'm curious, what would you say as a peacemaker to one of those groups or both of those groups? What would you say to the people? Because there are some Christian leaders that you and I know who on social media are saying that immigrants are responsible for the housing crisis right now, as if people who own land and have exploitative economic practices shaped by capitalism aren't the ones who are guilty, right? They're blaming immigrants for this. What would you say to that allegation, and what would you say as a Christian peacemaker?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Where to start? I mean, I think you're right on that correctly diagnosing where the issue is so important. And gosh, you can't look at politics these days and not really see how much solidarity there is amongst the wealthy, right? That like when it comes down to it, um, wealthy Democrats and wealthy Republicans will get in a room and get along when it comes to preserving the way that our class system is set up, right?
Yeah.
They may yell at each other, in political theater, and then they'll go in and make a deal together, right? That hurts
Mhm.
everybody else. Um, so I'm certainly not the first to say this, but if they have class solidarity, why don't we? Right?
Wow.
Um, because and you're right, the tactic is divide and conquer. And um, I I would say personally in my work, I don't as often see it between those two groups that you described. What I see way more often is folks who are sort of barely making it, um, who are, they're your one or two paycheck away from maybe experiencing homelessness, but
Mm,
they have
mm,
sort of the a baseline of stability, looking down on folks who are experiencing homelessness, right?
wow.
Sort of, um, I think we are part of the American and Western um, mythologizing says that like we always think that we're heading toward like being a millionaire or a billionaire
Mhm.
when all of us are so much closer to experiencing homelessness than ever achieving those things.
Wow.
But to not, but to notice that, I think exposes a vulnerability and makes
Mm,
us fearful. And I think that so much of the way those myths operate is keeping us afraid of being like them, those who have just slightly less than us. That
wow.
just so often I see folks who are working poor really have just horrible views of folks who experience homelessness because
Mm,
of that mythologizing of that, um, and also sometimes that feeling of like I can make it work, why can't you? Or I made it out, you should just do what I did. Um,
mm,
Not recognizing how lucky and how rare it is to get out of that situation.
right.
Um, I think a lot of, and we often tell like very feel good stories about people who make it out of poverty and homelessness. Um, and so like movies about this, right? Like The Pursuit of Happiness, or you can name 50 of them, right? And it's one thing to sort of honor and dignify that person's journey and the resilience and the um, incredible work they had to do to get there, and also to acknowledge that that is the exception and not the rule, and that
Mm,
everyone who didn't make it, it's not because they didn't try hard enough or because they didn't have as much resilience or gusto or whatever as the people that did make it. Um, our system is just not set up for everyone to make it.
wow. Wow. That's so good, man. Really appreciate that. Um, hey, so I know that we should be wrapping things up soon for a couple of reasons. One is just to be respectful of everyone's time, but my battery is also being sucked big time on my phone.
Okay.
So I'm
Yeah.
under 20% now. And,
Oh
just
man.
didn't realize that Substack Live would, take so much energy on my phone. But hey, I'm so glad we got to do this. And yeah, so excited for your second book. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of overlap between our voices. We're from completely different backgrounds and life experiences, but we're united in Christ, especially united in service of our marginalized neighbors. And I hope that's the vision that we can model for our subscribers, for people who listen to our voices, that you can have theological, political differences and still work together and still be united in Christ in pursuit of justice for our marginalized neighbors, and that's what we ultimately want to see. But any final thoughts or closing thoughts as we wrap up here, Kevin?
Well, one, I want to say thank you for doing this because we've been trying to do something like this for a while, and I'm glad we finally got to. I also want you to hold up your book again because people need to order this book. Um, if you
Okay.
order it right now, it's going to get there because it drops in like a week, right?
Yeah, a week and a half. Yeah,
Oh
less
my
than a week and a
gosh.
half. It's
Yeah. So you
crazy.
better pre-order now if you want it to arrive on your doorstep on the day it comes out, or you're going to have serious FOMO because everyone else is going to read it before you do, and that would just be
Yeah,
terrible. So
yeah.
get that book. And I've only read just a few excerpts of it, but knowing one, what I've read, two, what I've read from you previously, what I
Mm,
know about you, like this book is going to be so good, and just so desperately needed right now. I talk all the time about how much we really, really need like very readable books on liberation theology.
mm,
Because all of the like primary texts for that, like James Cone, Gustavo Gutierrez, Willie Jennings, like those guys are amazing, and they're such good writers, and they're so brilliant and academic that it's really hard for just the average person to pick it up and read it.
mm,
And I can tell just again because I know you because I've read a little bit that this is that and is just filling such a desperate need,
mm.
especially right now. So everyone,
Thanks, brother.
get that
That's
book.
very kind.
Thank you for writing it. Can't wait to read this
Yeah.
one and your next 10. Get to work, man. We need you.
Oh man, that's very kind. I really appreciate that. And yeah, what I so appreciate about your voice, Kevin, is that um, you do have the academic credentials, right? Both of us went to seminary. You do, you are quite well read and educated and informed. Uh, but what I appreciate the most about your voice is that you're also a fellow practitioner in the trenches. Our knowledge or wisdom comes from working firsthand on the margins and not just from textbooks, which can be helpful. I mean, we're both about books, we're both authors, obviously, but um, there's nothing like getting out there and cultivating the eyes to see Jesus in the margins for yourself, right? And both of us have had to unlearn and learn on the margins ourselves as practitioners, and that's the work we're ultimately inviting the church into as well, into what we've tasted and seen for ourselves of the goodness of God. So, yeah, brother, appreciate you and your voice and your camaraderie, and yeah, we'll do more things like this in the days to come. This was a lot of fun, and it seems
Yeah.
like people really leaned in too. So, yeah, thank you to all those of you watching, especially those of you who dropped comments, and yeah, stay tuned for Kevin's book. And Kevin, where can we pre-order your book, your second book, right now?
Uh, uh, Everywhere books are sold. Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Bookshop. There's a bookstore near me though that I'm working with to do signed copies. It's called Moon Palace Books. So
Nice.
if you pre-order it from Moon Palace, it'll come signed. So support a
Right.
local bookstore that actually does and has historically done really great stuff for our unhoused neighbors in Minneapolis. So
That's incredible. Yeah. And I'll say this real quick. If you're in the US, you can order my book, The Justice of Jesus, from Baker Bookhouse for a special discount. It's 40% off plus free shipping right now if you
no,
pre order before the book is out. So take full advantage of this massive discount and free shipping through Baker Bookhouse. Links are in my Substack or my bio. But yeah, and then you can also, if you're outside the US, you can buy it anywhere you buy your books, just like in the U.S. But if you're in the U.S., that's a special offer right now.
no.
Um,
Take advantage of that 40% and buy two.
right, right, and maybe give the other 40% that you spend towards an organization doing good work on the margins. Right. I mean, yeah,
There you go.
say whatever means means we have to do the work of justice. So, hey, appreciate you, Kevin, and we'll be in touch, brother. Blessings, blessings, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.